So, to this point, we've talked about how to interpret uh, prophetic illustrative messages, and that's when the prophet's life itself is used to convey a message. And we use the example of Hosea marrying a prostitute. God tells him to do that because Hosea's own life will illustrate to his community what Israel is doing to God. And the two questions we ask there is, what is the parallel between the illustration and the spiritual reality? And second, what is God's desired result? Then we talked about interpreting when God gives a verbal message to the prophet. And basically, I summarized that into get and use really good commentaries, because there really isn't a shortcut. There's not much I can tell you as far as you figuring out on your own, because these messages are steeped in so much history that unless you are really familiar with the history of that historical time period, you're not going to understand the messages. So really get yourself some good commentaries, and you almost have to go line by line to understand what the prophet is saying in those verbal messages. On the other hand, now let's talk about visions. Now, visions is a little different in that a lot of times we think of visions as being the more difficult part of prophecy, when it's actually probably the easiest, because when a prophet has a vision, a lot of times it's explained. So I'm going here to Daniel chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, and the dream of the statue, where different parts of the statue are made by are composed of different elements. And he's smart. He knows that if he tells his wise men the dream, they can just make up whatever they want to be its interpretation. And so he doesn't let that happen. He says, whoever knows the interpretation of the dream, they've got to tell me what I dreamed as well. Daniel steps up to the plate, and here he is in chapter 2, verse 36 forward. He tells him the dream he had. He tells him, "You are the King of Kings." I'm sorry, I'm skipping it here. In verse 31, he says, "You were looking, and behold, there is a single great statue. The head was made of gold, the breasts and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet were made of part iron, part clay. Then a stone, which was cut without hands, strikes the statue on the feet, crushing them, and the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time." And anyway, that was then the statue became a great mountain which filled the whole earth. So that's the vision recounted. And the beautiful thing about that is we don't have to try and figure out what's what. And what I really want to point out about this is that in prophetic literature, even though a lot of times we read Revelation, or we read these visions and we say, we've got to figure out what this means and what does that mean, that's a bad mentality, or that mentality might keep you from really understanding the purpose of the prophetic book. In this case, for example, Daniel has a purpose. There's a bigger message to this than just figuring out what represents what. The other thing is, the vision is interpreted, so it's kind of easy. If you just look forward, it tells us, you're the head of gold, Babylon's the head of gold, and after you rise another kingdom inferior to you, then another kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth, and then there will be a fourth kingdom, as strong as iron. Now, so Daniel tells him what the individual portions represent, and I just want to point this out. Historically, we can be pretty sure that Medo-Persia and Greece are the kingdoms referred to, although all these kingdoms are debatable. Daniel doesn't name them for us. Of course, that'd be crazy. How's he going to name something that doesn't exist? But he doesn't name them, and so to some degree these are questionable, and they are debatable. But I want to point out that even if we didn't know what each of these individual things represented, the point is still made. Because our job is not to interpret the vision. It's just to appreciate what the prophet has already done. Let me illustrate this. The real point of the vision is the rock that strikes the feet, and that the whole thing becomes a mountain. Because in verse 44 he says, the kingdom of God of heaven, in those days in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. And that kingdom will not be left to other people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it itself will endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy. So really the point of the vision isn't so much as identifying each of the individual elements, but rather that whatever kingdoms they represent, God is ultimately going to crush everything and set up his own enduring kingdom. And all this to say, the moral of the story is, a lot of times we get caught up in wanting to identify the individual parts of prophecy or a vision, and we miss out on the real important thing, on the moral of the story. So here's what I'm going to suggest to you. When you're interpreting a vision, I want you to ask yourself these 4 questions. Number 1, is the vision interpreted in that same passage? And you'll see a lot of times Daniel or whatever vision you're looking at, the vision is interpreted for you already. And so all you have to do is read on and you know what's what. But the second most important question is, what is the main purpose of the vision? What's the main theme or the moral of the story as far as the vision is concerned? That is probably the biggest question you can ask of any vision. What is the real motivating factor behind the vision? And once you get a handle of that, then you can really prioritize how important it is to identify the various elements. And I'm going to really say that's really what we're getting at when we're interpreting visions, or when we're looking at visions in prophecy. Is it interpreted, and whether it is or isn't, what is the real main thrust or the moral of the story as far as the vision is concerned? Now, sometimes we'll find ourselves in a situation where we really want to identify certain elements. And that's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I am going to suggest you be really cautious how far you go with that. Like I said, the real important part is the real important part. And so if you're taking this to an extreme, you might just get lost and get confused and be wasting your time. But if for whatever reason we're in a position we need to identify the elements, there's 2 questions I would suggest you ask yourself, and that is, are there elements that seem to help identify various symbols? I'm just going to give you one example here. Medo-Persia was a kingdom that had 2 sides to it, the Medes and the Persian sides, and there were 2 kingdoms. And historically, it was kind of an awkward kingdom because the Persian side was a lot stronger than the Mede side. And so a lot of times when you look at the Medo-Persian Empire being represented in visions, it'll be like something with 2 horns, and one's longer than the other. And because it's a 2-sided kingdom with one side much more powerful than the other. And so there's an element there that helps you identify what that symbol represents. That one is pretty clear, it's one of the more obvious ones, but still somewhat vague, and you gotta always be somewhat skeptical of it. The other question is, sometimes there's a theme in the literary work that helps you identify the meaning of the vision. I think in Daniel, for example, you'll see the theme throughout Daniel is the God's sovereignty. And so if you get stuck in a particular vision and you're not sure what to make of it, you can just go for the entire theme. Same thing with Revelation. Pick up on the gist of the entire story, and it'll help you interpret the individual portions. Anyway, so that's interpreting visions, and sorry that's so anticlimactic, but I think for everybody's goodness, get the moral of the story. That's the real important part.